My morning commute froze in place when the radio calmly announced a monster gate ahead. 700 meters stood between me, a supernatural disaster, and another late arrival at work. I did not panic, I just sighed and called the office to apologize. Strangely enough, everything felt peaceful again once the emergency warning faded into ordinary music. Back then, I was only an accountant who had coasted through life on talent. Daeseong just smiled, because outside busy season, even accountants were allowed to breathe. I had never needed all of my ability, and honestly that suited me perfectly. Then Daeseong mentioned new mana tests for civilians under 35, and my morning got worse. For years, I had slipped past every testing age bracket like it had nothing to do with me. In our world, gates were not legends anymore. They were disasters handled by the state. When one erupted, even missiles had been needed to stop the monsters pouring out. Still, to me, this new test sounded less like destiny and more like paperwork. Then my phone rang with the message I had narrowly avoided for years. That weekend, I went to the test, dressed like I was attending civil defense. My only plan was to finish quickly and reward myself with a bowl of tendon. That simple plan died the moment I saw the crowd outside the testing center. Hours crawled by, and hunger slowly turned my patience into pure irritation. At last, I entered an examination room with a machine much larger than expected. The machine hummed, while mana particles washed over my arm like a strange medical scan. The first result made the researcher tilt his head like the machine had lied. After measuring again, his confusion hardened into fear, and I finally knew something was wrong. My affinity was 100, nearly double the strongest number I had ever heard. Inside that pantry, I sat there wondering if my ordinary life had just ended. Then Kim Myungju confirmed it himself and bowed like Korea's future depended on me. I asked quietly, what would happen if I simply refused to cooperate? The answer was prison, because disaster mobilization worked almost like wartime orders. So my choice was not really a choice, just cooperation wrapped in polite words. Then Myungju shifted from threats to rewards, sitting down like the real negotiation had begun. 10 billion won as a contract bonus hit my ears harder than any prison sentence. As an accountant, I understood money, and this amount was almost unreal, but no salary could erase the image of entering dungeons and risking my life. I asked for 1 week because deciding my future in that room felt impossible. Myungju bowed again and asked me to protect Korea with a sincerity I could not ignore. I did not know it then, but my result had already reached the minister. The minister smiled until he heard my affinity score and realized it was impossible. To them, 100 was not just talent, it was national power. But when Myungju said I was not secured, that private room turned cold. They had lost a hunter overseas before, so giving me time sounded insane. Still, Myungju believed trust mattered more than dragging me into service by force. Monday morning came, and I lied about being sick because my mind would not settle. I knew eventually I would become a hunter, but knowing did not make it easy. Modern life had raised me far from death, monsters, and anything called sacrifice. On the final day, I drove south without telling anyone where I was going. At first, Ulsan looked normal enough that the disaster almost felt exaggerated. Then the city opened into ruins so vast I could not look away. Missiles had saved the country there, but they had erased an entire district. The smell was gone, yet the silence still felt like chemicals and corpses. If gates kept slowing down, Korea's collapse would not stay a distant fear. So I called Myungju and finally said I would try becoming a hunter. His voice answered from behind me, as if Korea's future had been waiting there all along. When I arrived, the training institute looked far larger than any photo had promised. Only 98 trainees existed after counting me, and that made the huge campus feel stranger. Myungju explained proudly that swordsmanship and magic needed space, researchers, and room to expand. For some reason, the education director himself guided me all the way to my dormitory. The 16th floor felt less like student housing and more like a hotel suite. Everything inside looked brand new. Even the washing machine still had its protective film. Myungju showed everything, like a real estate agent selling comfort with government money. At 3:15, they would decide whether I should study swordsmanship or magic. Once alone, I collapsed into the sofa and learned what expensive furniture felt like. That comfort vanished when I remembered my parents still knew nothing about this. I postponed telling them because even starting training already felt heavy enough. 2 quiet hours passed with a future hunter doing absolutely nothing on a luxury sofa. Exactly on time, a knock pulled me back from avoidance into reality. Behind Myungju stood a giant swordsman and a gentle-looking magic instructor holding a thin stick. The sword instructor looked annoyed that a trainee was being tested like royalty. Without ceremony, he handed me a real sword and told me to draw it. When the blade came free, it looked far too sharp for a normal accountant. My first swing cut the air harder than I expected, and Go Jung-in noticed. The horizontal swing nearly reached the sofa, but I pulled it back just in time. After several motions, I was sweating and breathless, but at least I had not failed. Go Jung-in admitted. I was decent enough, which somehow felt like real praise. Then Seo-ite smiled kindly and moved the test toward magic. Magic began with a thin stick, a table, and the idea of controlling invisible mana. Seo made it rise smoothly, like a simple trick hiding an impossible discipline. I copied her, thinking high affinity should at least make the first step easy. The stick rolled, then snapped upright faster than even Seo-ite expected. Then my control exploded and the stick shot straight into the ceiling. Everyone froze there, because my beginner mistake looked strong enough to kill a monster. Myungju decided instantly that my path would be magic, not swordsmanship. After they left, I sat there with a hole in the ceiling and no explanation. Outside my room, Seo finally asked the question I wanted answered too. The number 100 was apparently enough to silence even veteran instructors. I did not know it then, but my score had become a secret worth guarding. Go still wanted the sword path, until Seo admitted my magic talent made no sense. Even Seo doubted whether she had the skill to teach someone that abnormal. For now, they placed me with beginners learning how to sense mana. The next morning, my training life began with a breakfast far beyond cereal. My timetable showed magic was only one part of becoming a real hunter. On the field, I saw aura shimmer on a sword like living red fire. For one moment, I wondered if swordsmanship might have been interesting too. Inside basic magic, 3 young trainees mistook me for a professor. When I answered, they realized the new trainee was 31 years old. Seo entered awkwardly and moved me from the chair to the floor for real training. Before my turn, she checked each trainee's breathing and mana progress carefully. Then she asked whether I had read the material she sent yesterday. I had read all 200 pages, not just the first chapter. Apparently, that surprised her almost as much as my mana sensing did. I had already felt mana alone but stopped before the dangerous breathing technique. Seo began carefully, placing her fingertips near my chest and guiding my breathing. When I inhaled, mana rushed toward me like the room itself was being pulled in. Then I exhaled, and the violent surge vanished into an impossible calm. Every breath repeated the same storm until Seo looked like she wanted to cry. I opened my eyes because the classroom had gone unnaturally silent around me. Seo's voice trembled when she insisted nothing was wrong, which only made it worse. By their eyes, I realized my breathing had already become something abnormal. Still, I chose to continue properly instead of pretending to be weaker. Every inhale pulled the lecture hall's mana toward me like a vortex. Inside my chest, I guided only a portion of that mana toward my heart. Seo kept instructing because even abnormal talent still needed safe guidance. The gathered mana compressed instantly before Seo could even finish explaining the step. Finding the point, inside my heart took only one careful, quiet moment. When I asked what to fix, Seo could only say I was doing too well. Only after me did the other trainees remember they had their own training. Later, gym class proved magic talent meant absolutely nothing against basic running. Younger trainees whispered that I looked old enough to be 30, which was painfully accurate. A friendly trainee approached first, probably trying to shield me from all the staring. Once my age spread around, half the gym came over to greet their new senior. Being called uncle felt safer than being called oppa by 19-year-olds. The instructor arrived and announced a light 20-lap warm-up like it was nothing. By the 4th lap, I knew this former accountant was losing badly. Soon the gap became a full lap, and encouragement barely reached my ears. While I suffered, rumors about my impossible mana talent spread faster than I ran. After the run, I was excused from training by something close to near-death exhaustion. Watching the others made me understand that stamina in dungeons meant survival itself. The instructor returned with tiny pink dumbbells and a suspiciously kind smile. Minutes later, I learned those harmless dumbbells could become heavier than pride. After brutal classes, I returned exhausted but still sat down to study magic theory. For the first time, magic felt real instead of some hunter fantasy on television. Korea's system came from Arcadia, and apparently even that required serious national resources. Magic Missile looked simple enough that I almost wanted to cast it immediately. 1 week later, training life felt routine, though my body still disagreed with that idea. The younger trainees now greeted me naturally, like I was their strange older classmate. Minjung sounded worried, so I joked that before 30, everything was still early. CO arrived precisely and split the class between formula practice and circle activation. Minjung went first, so I watched every movement carefully, knowing my turn came next. With Seo guiding, Minjung drew stored mana outward and began rotating it around her heart. A tiny ring formed from her mana, bright enough to make the whole room hold still. When it settled, Minjung became a first circle mage and everyone congratulated her. Now only I remained without a circle, and Seo looked more nervous than me. I sat ready, with both hands on my knees, while Seo treated me like broken brakes. My mana moved smoothly from the heart, controlled but terrifyingly responsive under her guidance. For once, nothing exploded, and my control stayed delicate enough to reassure Seo. The ring completed, and the hum inside my body grew louder than Minjung's. But the circle never expanded, even when the rotation screamed faster and faster. Increasing speed failed, so SCO guided me back to the beginning before something went wrong. When I opened my eyes, the breakthrough I expected had slipped away completely. Class ended awkwardly, and I hid my disappointment behind the most polite nod I could manage. Outside the room, Seo's smile collapsed, though I did not see it happen. Her hands shook as she called Myungju, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The impossible genius had failed at the first circle, and even my instructor had no answer. Behind that failure, I started wondering whether my talent had been misunderstood from the start. For once, the teacher sounded more afraid of my future than I did. I did not know the president's office was already discussing whether to hide my existence. To the government, a 31-year-old magic trainee was not just news, but dangerous bait. Choi wanted exposure, while the president refused to gamble public hope before seeing proof. After leaving him, Choi still wanted me raised into something politically explosive. Myungju stayed quiet, because he understood I was becoming useful before I was ready. Then Seo called, and my failed circle turned their secret miracle into a problem. All the conditions had supposedly been met, yet my circle still refused to form. Choi panicked because he had already carried my potential all the way to the president. Myungju went straight to the only mage powerful enough to guess the reason. Even at her door, Korea's strongest mage answered him only through a message. When Cha answered, the music behind her was so loud, Myungju had to shout. She dismissed it, until my high mana affinity changed the shape of the answer. The explanation was simple and brutal. My vessel needed far more mana than normal. Through that call, Myungju also heard how badly Korea was wearing down its strongest mage. Afterward, Myungju looked exhausted, but he finally had an answer for Seo. Seo returned calmly, and told me the solution was to gather more mana. For the first time, I worked obsessively at something I truly wanted to master. My mana grew fivefold in 1 week as my body adapted to breathing technique. After daily checks, Seo finally decided I had gathered enough to try again. This attempt began with a heavier mana mass moving smoothly out from my heart. Careful rotation followed, and this time my control did not frighten Seo as much. Then the sound rose sharply, and the circle finally broke outward from my body. Instead of 1 meter, my circle expanded wide enough to swallow half the room. Only then did Seo understand that my failure had been proof of abnormal capacity. At her command, I contracted the massive circle and drew it back into myself. The circle settled perfectly around my heart, rotating on its own without effort. When my eyes opened, I had finally become a first circle mage. My failure had not meant weakness. My starting line had simply been monstrous. Only after success did the others finally breathe, gasping at how enormous my circle had been. Seo congratulated me, but I still believed her guidance had carried me through the process. First circle magic was only the beginning, and even beginners eventually entered real dungeons. Fireball looked simple, on paper, one formula and one circle, but now I could actually try. I drew mana from my circle and formed the basic outline almost naturally. When Seo allowed the next step, I filled the formula before anyone expected it. A small flame appeared at my fingertip, stable enough to follow every motion I made. 3 weeks later, I had mastered every first circle spell and somehow become everyone's tutor. Minjong struggled beside the table, combining formulas only for her magic circle to collapse again. I corrected her formula piece by piece, pointing out every broken calculation I could see. Suji faced something harder than formulas because magic message demanded a clear mental sound. Her broken message reached my mind like a ghost whispering nonsense in the dark. Talent made everything look unfairly easy, and the girls refused to let me deny it. Minchiol quietly admitted his wall was clean, the trickiest first circle utility spell. Clean required control, because 4 formulas had to work together without collapsing. After my advice, Minchiol adjusted the mana flow and the spilled coffee vanished cleanly. The doorbell interrupted our study and Suji returned with the real late-night reward. Chicken changed practice into something warmer, almost like a small farewell party upstairs. Between bites, Suji called it the final day of our 16th floor Magic Academy. I promised visits, but everyone understood higher classes and dungeon training were waiting. Minjong reminded me that mastering first circle meant my first dungeon deployment was close. Dungeon deployment waited somewhere ahead, but strangely, I did not feel afraid. My quiet confidence made the next step feel less like fear and more like inevitability. That night ended with chicken jokes and the shadow of my first dungeon. I did not know Myungju's voice trembled when he heard I mastered first circle. Later I learned Ji called 3 weeks insane for perception, circle activation, and mastery. The real issue became where to send me now that dungeon deployment was unavoidable. Ji warned them that experienced teams would resent losing someone just to make space for me. Myungju refused second string because my safety apparently mattered more than ordinary trainee resentment. One name silenced the room. Cheseon could collapse and Korea needed another pillar. The order was simple enough. I would join the strongest F-rank trainee team. Before I arrived, Team 25A was already angry that someone had been removed for me. Moon mentioned Uncle, and the rumor that I mastered first circle in only 3 weeks. Songwi and Gangjin decided I had to leave if they wanted Jiyun back. Moon doubted them, but loyalty pushed him into agreeing with their plan. When I entered the training room, 3 hostile stares were already waiting. Their greetings were cold and short, but honestly better than the backlash I expected. Ji raised his hand and a third circle illusion turned the room into forest. Moon started explaining our formation until Gangjin cut him off before he helped too much. 10 minutes passed quickly, and I took my place inside that unfriendly formation. The first rustle came ahead and Songwei cut the goblin illusion down instantly. More rustling followed, until goblins began pouring from both sides of the narrow path. I felt Moon behind me, but his covering fire never came when danger closed in. 4 goblins charged, so I stopped the first with a clean magic missile. 3 still rushed, too close for a normal beginner mage to handle safely. So I opened 3 circles at once, answering each threat with a different spell. Moon finally understood. The rumor was wrong, only because it had understated me. I felt Ji watching from behind, but I didn't know he was analyzing my spell simplification. My spells fired like quick pistol shots, weaker than full casts but fast enough to buy seconds. At that moment, I only cared about stopping goblins before panic broke the formation. Songhui and Gangjin finished the wave cleanly, cutting down every illusion left around us. I looked back at Moon, smiled lightly, and gave him a thumbs up instead of accusing him. Maybe that gesture confused him more than anger would have, but fighting him felt pointless. The forest shifted again, and I moved forward inside the same uncomfortable formation. This time Moon covered properly, even when Songhui's sharp glance tried to stop him. When training ended, Moon looked pale and drained, while my breathing had barely changed. He finally asked about my mana, and I answered honestly that my pool was just large. Only then did the swordsman compare Moon's exhaustion with how much strength I still had. Instructor Ji praised me carefully, but I could tell he was holding back most of it. I asked permission to leave for my magic exchange meeting, though it was really our upstairs academy. Moon's eyes changed for a second, like he wanted that lesson but couldn't bring himself to ask. After I left, GNO's real lesson began, but it was aimed at Team 25A. Later I understood his warning meant they had to reject me properly or accept me properly. Half-hearted hostility was useless to everyone, and G knew it taught me nothing real. Left behind, Songhui pressed Moon for stopping their plan after only one failed betrayal. Moon answered firmly that letting goblins through would not even scratch a mage like me. From Moon's view, I looked like a higher circle mage trapped inside first circle spells. In the end, survival mattered more than pride because even F-rank dungeons could kill. Their rejection shifted into regret, and our team began again from the wrong first step.